Captain Jack Wilson stood alone on the wide observation deck of the huge spaceship GCS Horizon, his eyes fixed on the blue-green planet below. Earth looked small from up here, like a pretty ball hanging in the dark emptiness of space. By the standards of the Galactic Coalition, Earth was a simple, backward world. But it had one thing no other planet in the galaxy seemed to have in large numbers: humans. The door to the deck slid open with a soft hiss. First Officer Zexna walked in, her 4 bright purple eyes blinking one after another in a wave-like pattern. 2 of her eyes looked at the captain while the other 2 studied Earth below. "Are you really sure about this plan, Captain?" she asked, her voice buzzing slightly. "Humans are known to be wild and impossible to predict. They don't follow logical patterns." "That's exactly why we must have one on our ship," Jack said, turning to face his second-in-command. The light from Earth reflected off his skin, showing that despite his human-like appearance, he wasn't human at all. His skin had a slight blue tint and moved strangely, like it was flowing rather than stretching. "The Shard ships have figured out all our battle plans and moves. All our math-based tactics fail now. We need someone who thinks in ways they can't guess." Zexna's upper arms crossed while her lower arms hung loose. "The Council won't like this. Taking primitives off-world breaks at least 6 laws." "The Council isn't fighting this war on the front lines," Jack said firmly. "I've watched 7 coalition ships get destroyed in the past month. Each one followed perfect battle logic. Each one died because of it." He looked back at Earth. "We need human chaos." Down on Earth, Susan Miller sat on the curb next to her broken-down car, head in her hands. At 35, her life was falling apart around her. The small tech company where she had worked for 8 years had shut down yesterday. All staff let go without warning. Her landlord had called this morning to tell her the building was being sold, and all tenants had to leave within 30 days. And now her old car had finally died, smoke pouring from under the hood, stranding her on a lonely stretch of highway miles from the nearest town. "Could this day get any worse?" she muttered, kicking a rock with her worn boot. The sun was setting, and soon it would be dark. Few cars passed this way, especially at night. Susan had tried calling for help, but her phone showed no signal. A bright light suddenly appeared in the sky above her. At first she thought it was a plane, but it moved too strangely, hovering directly overhead. The light grew brighter and brighter until Susan had to cover her eyes. When she opened them again, she wasn't sitting by the highway anymore. The room around her was bright white and perfectly clean. Too clean. The walls curved in ways that didn't seem quite right, and the air smelled like nothing at all. Not even the sterile smell of a hospital. It simply had no scent. A door appeared in the wall, not opening but simply appearing where no door had been before. Through it walked a man who looked almost normal, except his movements were too smooth and his eyes too large. "Susan Miller," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "My name is Captain Jack Wilson of the Galactic Coalition Navy. I apologize for bringing you here so suddenly, but we have an emergency situation." Susan jumped to her feet, backing away until she hit the wall. "What the hell is going on? Where am I? Are you some kind of government agent? Aliens? Am I losing my mind?" The captain held up his hands in a calming gesture. "All fair questions. You are currently aboard the GCS Horizon, a coalition warship in orbit around Earth. And yes, I suppose by your definition, we would be aliens, though I was designed to appear mostly human to make this easier." "Designed?" Susan whispered, noticing now how his skin seemed to flow rather than stretch when he moved. "I'll explain everything," he said. "But first, I'd like to offer you a job. We need a human intuition specialist on our ship. The pay is excellent. We can deposit the equivalent of $250,000 per Earth year into any account you choose. You'll have comfortable living quarters here, the best medical care in the galaxy, and a guaranteed safe return to Earth when your contract ends. Standard contracts are for 2 Earth years." Susan laughed, a sharp, disbelieving sound. "You're offering me a job? On an alien spaceship? This has to be a dream or a mental breakdown." "It's neither," Captain Wilson said, pressing something on his wrist. A section of the wall became transparent, showing a view of Earth from orbit. Susan's legs went weak at the sight, and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "This is real," she whispered. "Very real," the captain said, "and we're in very real danger. The Coalition is at war with a species called the Shard. They've figured out all our battle patterns. We need a human mind, someone who can think in unusual ways. Someone who can come up with solutions no Coalition tactical computer would ever suggest." "But why me?" Susan asked, still staring at the Earth hanging in space. "I'm nobody special. Just an out-of-work engineer with a broken car and no home." "Actually, that's exactly why we chose you," Captain Wilson said. "You have technical knowledge but no strong ties to Earth right now, and our scans showed you have particularly high neural flexibility and creativity, even for a human. You think outside normal patterns." He extended his hand, which looked human but moved in a slightly wrong way. "Will you help us, Susan Miller? The Coalition has been secretly recruiting humans for decades. Every successful ship in our fleet has one. You would be joining an exclusive group, humans who live among the stars and help save lives across the galaxy." Susan looked at his hand, then back at the view of Earth. Her world looked so small from up here, all her problems tiny beyond measure. A day ago she had nothing. Now she was being offered the stars. She took a deep breath and shook his hand. "I must be crazy, but yes, I'll do it." Susan stared at the strange blue liquid in her cup. The label on the food machine had said coffee, but the smell was wrong. She took a small sip and nearly spit it out. "This is terrible," she said, dumping the rest into the waste slot on the wall. "It tastes like someone described coffee to a robot who then tried to make it from cleaning chemicals." Rix, her alien guide, laughed. His laugh sounded like small bells ringing. He was a short creature covered in golden fur with 6 arms and a round face with large green eyes. 2 of his arms held tools, 2 were typing on a floating screen, and 2 were gesturing as he spoke. "The taste synthesizer has trouble with Earth foods," Rix explained. "No one on the ship has actually tasted real Earth coffee, so the machine is working from data only." Susan had been on the GCS Horizon for 2 weeks now. Every day brought new wonders and strange challenges. Her room was nice enough, about the size of her old apartment on Earth, with a soft bed that adjusted to her body and walls that could change color with a thought. But everything felt slightly wrong. The lights were too bright, the air felt too clean, and the food, well, the less said about the food, the better. "Come on," Rick said, using one of his free hands to pat her shoulder. "Today you start real work. Captain wants you in the engine room." They walked through the curved hallways of the ship. Susan still got lost every time she went anywhere alone. The corridors all looked the same, and they seemed to change when she wasn't looking. Crew members of many different alien species passed by. Some nodded to her, others stared, and a few quickly moved away. Humans were still rare on Coalition ships. "Why are some of them afraid of me?" Susan asked as a tall, thin alien with skin like tree bark hurried past. "Not afraid. Nervous," Rix corrected. "Humans are unpredictable. Some crew members find that uncomfortable. They like order and patterns. Humans break patterns." The engine room was huge, with a glowing blue core in the center that pulsed like a heartbeat. Engineers of various species worked at stations around it. Lieutenant Valine, a tall alien with silver skin and no visible eyes, was waiting for them. "Human Miller," Valine said in a flat voice. "We have a problem with the life support system for Deck 7. Efficiency has dropped 8%. We have run 3 standard diagnostic programs. The issue remains unsolved." Susan looked at the displays showing the life support system. It was far more advanced than anything on Earth, but the basic principles seemed similar. "Can I see the airflow diagrams?" she asked. Valine touched a panel, and a 3D model appeared in the air. Susan walked around it, studying the flow patterns. "There's your problem," she said after a few minutes, pointing to a junction where 3 air ducts met. "The angle is wrong. It's creating turbulence. That's why efficiency is down." "Impossible," Valine said. "Those angles were calculated using standard Coalition algorithms. They are mathematically perfect. Perfect on paper, maybe, Susan said. But air doesn't always follow math. Look, just change this angle from 30 degrees to 45 and this one from 60 to 50. It'll work better. Vailine's fingers moved over the controls, making the changes. The system indicators immediately began to rise. Efficiency now at 104%, the computer announced. New record for this system type. How did you know that would work? Vailine asked, his silver face showing no expression but his voice betraying surprise. Susan shrugged. It just looked wrong. Back on Earth, I worked on ventilation systems for a while. Sometimes the real world works differently than theory. What Susan didn't understand yet was how shocking her solution was to the aliens. The coalition had been using the same airflow formulas for over 500 years. No one ever questioned them or tried different angles just because they looked wrong. Over the next few days, Susan found more problems she could solve with what she considered common sense. She fixed a water recycling system by suggesting they clean a filter that no one had checked in years. She improved the ship's communication system by moving an antenna 2 inches to the left. Small, simple changes that made big differences. In the captain's office, Jack Wilson watched recordings of Susan's work with growing interest. She's changing things we haven't changed in centuries, he told First Officer Zexina, who stood beside him. Coalition engineers are trained to follow established patterns. They don't experiment. They don't try random adjustments because something feels off. It's dangerous, Zexina said, her 4 eyes blinking nervously. These systems are stable because they follow tested formulas. Human chaos could cause failures. Or breakthroughs, the captain replied. The Shard are beating us because they've figured out our patterns. Maybe we need some human chaos to survive. Zexina's upper arms crossed in disagreement. The crew is talking. Many are uncomfortable with her changes to ship systems. Some say she should not be trusted with critical technology. And others say her methods, while strange, are effective, Zexina admitted. Engineering efficiency is up 12% overall. That evening, Susan sat alone in the ship's observation lounge, looking out at the stars. They were traveling at speeds she couldn't even comprehend, moving through space in ways Earth scientists had only dreamed about. Yet she had still managed to improve their systems with basic ideas from her simple planet. Captain Wilson found her there and sat down nearby. Feeling homesick? He asked. Susan laughed softly. For what? My broken-down car? My non-existent job? My apartment I got kicked out of? I had nothing there. And here? She turned to look at him. Here I have purpose. These past 2 weeks I've actually been able to help, make things better. It's more than I had on Earth. The captain nodded, pleased. Good. Because soon we'll need more than small engineering fixes from you. We've received word that Shard ships have been spotted in this sector. Within days, we may face battle. Susan felt a cold fear grip her stomach. I don't know anything about space battles. No, Captain Wilson agreed. But you know how to think in ways the Shard won't expect. That's why you're here. That's why every successful coalition ship has a human aboard. No pressure, Susan muttered. Considerable pressure, the captain corrected, not catching her sarcasm. But humans perform well under pressure. Another reason we need you. As he left, Susan looked back at the stars. Somewhere out there, deadly crystal ships were hunting them. And somehow she, a woman who couldn't even keep her car running on Earth, was supposed to help defeat them. The alarm blared through the ship, a high-pitched wail that made Susan's teeth hurt. She had been sleeping when it started, and now she ran down the corridor in the simple blue uniform they had given her, trying to remember the way to the bridge. All, crew to battle stations. Shard vessel detected. This is not a drill. The computer voice was calm, which somehow made it more frightening. Susan finally found the right elevator and pressed her hand against the scanner. The doors opened and she stepped inside. Bridge, she said, and the elevator began to move. Not up or down, but sideways, and then at an angle that made her stomach flip. When the doors opened again, she was on the bridge. It was a large, round, room with control stations around the edges and a central command area where Captain Wilson stood, looking at a huge screen that wrapped halfway around the room. "Ms. Miller, good," the captain said when he saw her. "Come here." Susan walked to the command area where First Officer Zexna and a reptilian alien she hadn't met before were studying a 3D display of space around their ship. "This is tactical. Officer Kress," the captain said, nodding to the reptile. Kress was tall and covered in green scales that seemed to shimmer as he moved. His eyes were yellow with black slits for pupils, and a crest of red scales ran from his head down his back. "Human," Kress said, nodding stiffly. "The shard ship will be in visual range in 30 seconds, Zexna reported, her 4 eyes focused on the display. Susan had heard about the shard from crew members, though no one would tell her much. She knew they were the enemy, dangerous and merciless. She had imagined them as monstrous creatures, like the aliens in scary movies back on Earth. "Visual contact," called out a crew member from one of the stations. The main screen flickered, and then Susan saw it. The shard ship was nothing like she had expected. It was beautiful, a sleek vessel that seemed to be made of crystal or glass, shimmering with inner light that pulsed in waves of blue and purple. It didn't look dangerous, it looked like art. "They're beautiful," she whispered, forgetting where she was for a moment. "And deadly," Captain Wilson said grimly. "The shard aren't evil as we understand it. They simply don't see other life forms as having any value. To them, we're like insects to be brushed aside when we're in their way." Kress's scales had changed color, shifting from green to a deep orange. "Their weapon systems are charging," he said, his voice hissing slightly. "Attack pattern detected. Raise shields," ordered the captain. "Evasive pattern Theta 9. Susan watched as the horizon began to move in a complex series of turns and spins. The movement followed a precise mathematical pattern, first left, then down, then right at exactly the same angle. It was like a perfect dance in space, every move calculated for maximum efficiency. But the shard ship followed them easily, matching each move as if it knew what they would do before they did it. "They've adapted to our evasion patterns," Zexna said, her voice still calm, though 2 of her 4 eyes were now looking at the captain with concern. "They're predicting our movements." "Switch to pattern Lambda 4, Captain Wilson ordered. Again, the ship moved in a different but equally precise pattern, and again the shard ship followed without difficulty. "They've analyzed all standard coalition evasion algorithms," Kress reported, his scales now flashing orange and red in stress. "Weapons lock imminent." Susan felt a cold knot of fear in her stomach. She wasn't a soldier or a space pilot, she was just an engineer from Earth who couldn't even keep her car running. What was she doing here? Then the captain turned to her. "Ms. Miller," he said urgently, "this is why you're here. We need a human solution. How would you evade that ship if you were flying?" Susan stared at him, then at the tactical display showing the 2 ships. The shard vessel was following them perfectly because it had learned to predict their movements. The coalition's tactics were too logical, too perfect. An idea flashed into her mind. "Don't evade," she said suddenly. "What?" Kress hissed, his scaled head snapping around to stare at her. "Don't evade," Susan repeated, more firmly now. "Do the opposite of what they expect. Accelerate directly toward them at full speed, then cut all engines when you're halfway there. Use the momentum to drift, but fire the side thrusters in a random pattern, not a calculated one, but truly random bursts. Then spin the ship around 180 degrees while still drifting." "That's..." Kress began, scales rippling in alarm. "Do it," Captain Wilson ordered, cutting him off. The pilot, a small blue alien with 6 eyes, looked confused but entered the commands. The horizon suddenly shot forward, racing straight toward the shard ship. Susan gripped the edge of the console as the acceleration pushed her back. "Cutting engines," the pilot announced. The ship continued to move forward on momentum alone. Susan could see the shard ship growing larger on the screen. It seemed to hesitate, as if confused by their actions. "Random thruster bursts," the captain ordered. The ship began to jerk and wobble in unpredictable ways as the thrusters fired in no particular pattern. Susan felt her stomach lurch with each random movement. rotating 180 degrees. The view on the screen spun as the ship turned completely around. Now they were moving backward toward the shard ship, but facing away from it. The shard vessel is attempting to adjust position, Kress reported, sounding surprised. They appear to be confused by our movement. Susan watched the display. The shard ship was trying to predict where the horizon would go next, but since their movements weren't following any logical pattern, it kept guessing wrong. We'll pass directly behind them in 5 seconds, the pilot said. Weapons ready, ordered the captain. As the horizon drifted past the shard ship, they had a perfect shot at its engines. Fire, Captain Wilson commanded. Beams of intense white light shot out from the horizon, striking the crystal ship's propulsion system. The lights inside the shard vessel flickered and dimmed. Direct hit, Kress announced, his scales settling back to a greenish yellow. Their main drive is disabled. They're drifting. A cheer went up from the bridge crew. Captain Wilson turned to Susan with a new look in his eyes. Respect. That, he said with a smile, was brilliantly irrational. A perfect human solution. He shook his head in wonder. No coalition tactical officer would ever have suggested such a maneuver. It breaks every rule of space combat. Sometimes breaking rules is the only way to win, Susan said quietly, still surprised that her wild idea had actually worked. Across the bridge, she noticed alien crew members looking at her differently now. No longer with confusion or suspicion, but with something new. They were looking at her with hope. Word spread fast through the Galactic Coalition fleet. Within days, every ship captain had heard about the human who outsmarted a shard vessel. Susan became something of a celebrity on the horizon. Crew members who had once avoided her now nodded, respectfully when she passed. Some even asked her questions about Earth and humans. I don't understand, Susan said to Rix one morning as they sat in the dining area. The food machine had finally produced something close to coffee, though it still tasted slightly like metal. I just had one good idea. Why is everyone treating me like I'm special? Rix's fur rippled in what Susan had learned was his version of a shrug. You don't see how important it was, he said, using 3 of his 6 hands to gesture while the others held tools. No one has ever defeated a shard ship that way before. The coalition has lost 68 ships in the past year alone. Everyone followed perfect battle plans. Everyone was destroyed. He leaned closer, his big green eyes blinking slowly. What you did was impossible by coalition standards. You ignored all tactical rules. You did something no computer would ever suggest, and it worked. Susan sipped her metallic coffee. On Earth, we call that thinking outside the box. What box? Rix asked, confused. It's just a saying. It means thinking beyond normal limits. Rix nodded. Coalition species don't do that well. We follow patterns. It's how our brains work. It's how our societies work. For millions of years, this made us strong. But now the shard can predict your patterns? Susan finished. Exactly. That's why every successful ship needs at least one human now. After finishing her coffee, Susan headed to engineering. Since the battle, she had been given more responsibilities. Today, she was supposed to check the quantum communications array, which had been acting strangely. The array was housed in a small room off the main engine area. Inside, 3 alien technicians were running tests on a device that looked like a crystal ball surrounded by spinning metal rings. It won't respond to any standard diagnostic programs, explained the lead technician, a tall, 4-armed being with skin that changed color as it spoke. We've tried all 14 approved procedures. Susan looked at the device. The crystal in the center should have been glowing bright blue, but instead it was dim and flickering. Have you tried turning it off and back on again? She asked. The technician stared at her. Turn it off, one repeated as if Susan had suggested setting the ship on fire. The quantum array has been active continuously for 7 years. Deactivating it would break all established protocols. Yes, but it's not working right now anyway, Susan pointed out. So what do you have to lose? The technicians looked at each other nervously. Finally, the lead technician sighed and pressed a sequence of buttons. The spinning rings slowed and stopped. The crystal went dark. "Now turn it back on," Susan said. Another sequence of buttons, and the rings began to spin again. The crystal, in the center, lit up, glowing a steady bright blue. "Full functionality restored," announced the computer. "Quantum communications operating at 100% efficiency." The technicians stared at the array, then at Susan, their faces showing a mix of shock and confusion. "How did you know that would work?" the lead technician asked. Susan smiled. "On Earth, turning things off and on again fixes about half of all technical problems. It's the first thing we try." As she left engineering, she heard the technicians talking excitedly behind her. One simple Earth solution had solved a problem their advanced alien technology couldn't fix. Later that day, Susan was called to the captain's office. When she arrived, she found Jack Wilson talking with a group of coalition officers she hadn't met before. They wore formal uniforms with many colorful symbols. "Ah, Ms. Miller," the captain said when he saw her. "These officers are from Coalition Command. They wanted to meet the human who defeated a shard ship." Susan felt uncomfortable under their curious stares. One of the officers, a tall being with skin like polished silver, stepped forward. "Your tactics were unusual," the officer said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "No Coalition tactical manual includes such maneuvers." "That's kind of the point," Susan replied. "If it's in your manual, the shard know about it too." The silver officer's head tilted slightly. "Indeed, this is why Command has approved a new program. More humans will be recruited for Coalition ships. Your success has proven the value of human unpredictability." After the officers left, Captain Wilson smiled at Susan. "You've made quite an impression," he said. "Not just with the battle, but with your work on the ship's systems. The quantum communications array, the water recycling improvements, the life support efficiency gains. Your simple human solutions have made the Horizon one of the most effective ships in the fleet." Susan shook her head. "I'm just applying basic stuff from Earth. Nothing special." "But it is special," the captain insisted. "Coalition species value order, patterns, and stability. We've been improving our technology for thousands of years, but always in small, careful steps along pre-approved paths. Humans leap over paths. You try things that seem illogical to us." He walked to the window, looking out at the stars. "The shard understand our patterns. They've studied us for centuries. They can predict what we'll do because we always do what makes the most logical sense. But humans sometimes choose the option that makes no logical sense at all. And sometimes that's exactly the right choice." Susan thought about Earth, about how chaotic and messy human lives were compared to the perfect order of the Coalition. Maybe there was value in that chaos after all. "There's a human saying," she told the captain. "Sometimes you need to break the rules to win the game." Captain Wilson turned to her with a serious expression. "We may need to break many rules soon. Our sensors have detected a fleet of shard vessels heading this way. 7 ships, all larger than the one we disabled." Susan felt her stomach tighten with fear. "One was hard enough. How do we fight 7? "I don't know," the captain admitted. "But I'm hoping you might have some ideas. Some human chaos might be exactly what we need." The senior officers gathered in the tactical room. Holograms showing the 7 approaching shard ships floated in the air above the central table. Susan stood among the alien commanders, feeling small and out of place. Captain Wilson had insisted she attend this meeting, even though she had no military rank. "The shard fleet will intercept us in 8 hours, Tactical Officer Kress reported, his scales a worried orange color. "They have positioned themselves to block all standard escape routes." "Can we fight them?" asked one of the engineering officers. Kress shook his head. 7 against 1. Our weapons might disable 1 ship, perhaps 2 if we are extremely fortunate, but not 7. "Can we outrun them?" asked another. "Negative," First Officer Zexna replied, her 4 eyes blinking rapidly. "Their ships are faster than ours. If we attempt to flee, they will catch us within 3 hours." A heavy silence fell over the room. Susan looked at the hologram, studying the positions of the enemy ships. They had formed a net in space, blocking every logical path the Horizon might take. "They know how we think," she said quietly. They know we'll try to escape along the most efficient route or fight using standard tactics. Captain Wilson nodded. Exactly. That's why I asked you here, Ms. Miller. We need something they won't expect. Something no coalition tactical computer would ever suggest. All eyes turned to Susan. She felt her heart beating faster as she stared at the hologram. 7 crystal ships against 1. Impossible odds. But she had to try. What if... She began slowly, an idea forming. What if we don't run and don't fight? What if we trick them instead? Explain, the captain said. Susan pointed to the hologram. Your sensor arrays can project false images, right? Create sensor ghosts? Zexina nodded. Yes, but the shard will see through such deceptions quickly. Their sensors are very advanced. Not if we confuse them first, Susan said, getting excited now. We could overload our sensor arrays to send out thousands of false signals all at once. Make it look like 20 coalition ships suddenly appeared. At the same time, we could modify our own signal to make the horizon look like something else. Maybe a small asteroid or piece of space junk. The officers looked at each other. It might work for a few minutes, Kress said doubtfully. But not long enough. A few minutes is all we need, Susan insisted. While they're confused, we slip through their net, moving slowly like debris, not in a straight line but in a wobbling path no ship would normally take. The captain studied the hologram, considering her plan. It's unorthodox, he said finally, but it might give us a chance. Let's do it. The next few hours were a blur of activity as the crew prepared to implement Susan's plan. Engineers worked to modify the sensor arrays. The propulsion team calculated a strange, irregular path through the shard formation. Before they began, Captain Wilson took Susan aside into a small conference room off the bridge. There's something you should know, he said in a low voice. Something few humans ever learn. Susan waited, sensing this was important. The reason humans are so valuable to us goes beyond your unpredictability, the captain continued. Your species has a unique neurological structure that allows for something we call quantum consciousness. What does that mean? Susan asked, confused. It means that human brains can sometimes influence probability fields at the quantum level, he explained. What you might call luck or intuition is actually something much more profound. When humans strongly focus on a desired outcome, they subtly affect the quantum probability of that outcome actually happening. Susan stared at him. That's impossible. Not impossible, just very rare in the galaxy. We've studied this phenomenon for centuries. Humans don't just think differently. You actually change reality around you in small but important ways. He leaned closer. Your presence on this ship doesn't just provide us with unusual strategies. It subtly alters probability in our favor. That's why your ideas work better than they should. That's why turning the quantum array off and on fixed it so perfectly. That's why your battle maneuver succeeded. Susan tried to process this. You're saying humans are lucky? I'm saying humans can influence luck, the captain corrected. And right now, we need all the luck we can get. When they returned to the bridge, final preparations were underway. Susan took her position at a console specially set up for her. Her job was to direct the pattern of false signals they would send out. Shard fleet now 5 minutes away, Kress announced, his scales rippling with stress. Begin the deception, ordered Captain Wilson. Susan activated her console. Immediately, the sensor arrays began broadcasting thousands of false signals. On enemy scanners, it would look like a small fleet of coalition ships had suddenly appeared, out of nowhere. Modifying our own signature now, Zexina reported. We should register as space debris on their sensors. Initiating irregular movement pattern, called the pilot. The horizon began to drift in a strange, wobbling path, like a piece of random space junk caught in conflicting gravitational fields. No sentient pilot would ever fly this way, which was exactly the point. On the main screen, they could see the shard ships reacting to the false signals, breaking formation to investigate the Phantom Coalition fleet. It's working, Kress said in amazement, his scales shifting to a hopeful yellow-green. They're confused. Susan watched the screen intently, focusing all her thoughts on their success. If what the captain had said was true, maybe her concentration could help, even just a little. Slowly, the horizon drifted through the scattered shard formation. One crystal ship passed dangerously close but continued on, chasing a false signal. "We're clear," the pilot announced after what seemed like hours, but was only 20 minutes. "Shard vessels are not pursuing." A cheer went up from the bridge crew. Captain Wilson smiled at Susan. "Another impossible success," he said quietly. "Quantum consciousness at work." Susan wasn't sure if she believed that humans could influence probability. It seemed more like science fiction than science, but she had to admit that her crazy plan had worked far better than it should have. Later, as the horizon sped toward Coalition space at full speed, Susan stood in the observation lounge, looking out at the stars. She thought about Earth, so small and isolated, unaware of its place in the galaxy. Captain Wilson joined her, standing silently beside her for a moment. "Will you tell other humans someday?" she asked. "About what we can do?" "Eventually," he replied, "when humanity is ready. For now, we'll continue recruiting individuals like you, those who can handle the truth and help us navigate a universe more strange and wonderful than most humans have yet imagined." Susan smiled. A month ago, she had been unemployed, homeless, and stranded on a highway. Now she was sailing among the stars, carrying a secret power she was only beginning to understand. And somewhere out there, on countless other alien ships, throughout the galaxy, other humans were serving the same essential role, bringing that unique human touch to the cosmos. "I guess we all have our place in the universe," she said. "Indeed," Captain Wilson agreed. "And humanity's place may be more important than you can possibly imagine."